Welcome to Brave New History. I'm here with John McHugh. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on, Elliot.
Yep.
Glad to be on
Uh,
Brave New History.
yep. Thank you. Thank you. John is the author of The Celestial Code of Scripture, the astral cipher underlying the miracle stories of the Bible and the Quran.
Yeah.
Now, I found this incredibly interesting. We were talking about it, how you take stories from the Bible, stories from the Quran, and they're they're in the stars, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, John certainly can do a better job of explaining it, and
Yeah.
thus
Well,
why he's here.
thanks.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me. And so, yeah. So, as far as my background, I'm an archaeologist, but I do have reading knowledge of a handful of ancient languages. And I have a specialty in archaeoastronomy. In Utah, I do a lot with Native American archaeoastronomy, especially as it relates to rock art. But uh, I try to utilize my reading knowledge of ancient languages. Uh, I accidentally stumbled on this ancient code, this arcane code, and I'd like to just go through it. So the the subtitle says it all. It's the astral cipher underlying the miracle stories of the Bible and the Quran. And if you had to say, well, what's your book about, John? Well, this is it. This is, I think, comes right out of the prelude. But while a grad student studying the role that astronomical knowledge played in the religious mythology of archaic civilizations at Brigham Young University, I stumbled onto an arcane celestial thinking paradigm unlike any we embrace today. This esoteric doctrine held that the constellations depicted still frames of all the monumental incidents that had taken place on Earth. Alternate readings for the cuneiform signs that were used to spell out the oldest constellation titles in each tableau divides the details and the action that was taking place in each astral scene. Hence, in the ancient world, the constellations depicted an infallible repository of mythical history, which cuneiform sources refer to as heavenly writing or constellation writing. Religious astrologers, such as the Magi that followed the Star of Bethlehem to baby Jesus, arranged the jumbled array of stellar snapshots and their accompanying missives into narratives, which were then recorded as history in pagan religious mythology, the Bible, and the Quran. That's what the book tells you about. That's what the book is about. So you might say, like, yeah, so some of the chapters from the book, one chapter shows that the Garden of Eden story can be traced. Every story element corresponds to an image in the constellations. Noah's flood and ark traced to a picture story in the Mesopotamian constellations. Samson's slaughter of 1,000 men with a donkey's jawbone, constellations, Mesopotamian constellations. Jonah's 3-day confinement in the sea monster's belly, that's in the constellations. Jesus' virgin birth and sea walk can be found stellar tableaus in the constellations. John's woman, child, and dragon vignette in Revelation 12, straight out of the Mesopotamian constellations. St. Christopher the giant, who carried baby Jesus across the river, found right in this stellar, what they call constellation writing of Mesopotamia. The Islamic claim that the Quran was based on a celestial tablet in heaven and Muhammad's encounter with the angel Gabriel, all of these can be traced to picture stories in the most ancient star atlases from Mesopotamia. So the first thing you got to understand, even to understand the book, you got to understand the secret sacred wisdom of the Mesopotamian astrologer. It's not like the horoscopic astrology that we think of today. So you got to get the nuances. And when you start looking at the cuneiform tablets, the nuances start to come out and you start to become dumbstruck. So ancient cuneiform tablets, by the way, I'm going to I interchangeably use the term astronomer, astrologer, astrology, astronomy, because in the ancient world, there was no distinction. They both related to the same thing. Astronomers were astrologers and vice versa. And so the cuneiform texts often in Akkadian, which is the spoken language of the Babylonians and the Assyrians, they often refer to the starry sky as Shitir Shamay, Shitir Barume. And it literally means, it means writing of the sky, celestial writing. A really good translation would be heavenly writing. It's divine writing. It's the writing of the star gods, which is why the title for an astrologer or an astronomer is absurd. It's writer. Like, what do you mean writer, author? It's because it implied the ability to read. And the main text that these astrologer scholars are reading is the starry sky. They're reading the starry sky as a pictographic text, the way we read a book, the way you read a picture book to your kids. It's very similar to that. So the Mesopotamian astrologer's job was to read the heavenly writing for signs of imminent events that were about to take place on Earth that could be exploited or avoided. So, like, if the sign said that there was going to be a capacious, wheat crop this year, then you would want to store that as a surplus and maybe leverage it and make money off of it. Obviously, if the sign said that there was going to be an assassination attempt on the king or queen, ditto, you want to make sure you get the substitute king sitting on the throne so they kill the wrong guy. You don't want to be that guy. Anyway, so predicting the future is pretty common sense. Everybody loves to read their horoscope. How could you not, right? It's fun. And quite frankly, a lot of people believe there's something to it, and I can't argue against it. Although I have to think scientifically when I try to publish in scholarly journals, there's something numinous there. Anyway, so the prediction part is a piece of cake. We all get that. What we're not used to is looking at the starry sky as a history book, a pictographic history book that explained the past. Not only the past, the monumental stories of inviolable history. They were written down regardless of whether they conformed to natural law, because they're written in the stars. They're depicted as tableaus in the constellations. So you get these pictures. The second part of that is what's very difficult to explain to English readers and writers. Wordplay in the constellations' cuneiform titles explain the action and the details that were taking part in these stagnant still frames. When you look at a picture in the stars, it's not doing anything. But wordplay encrypted, I call it polysemy, multiple meanings in a word or a phrase, was detected and decoded and recorded as the action that was taking place in the still frame. And this will come up as we continue with the slide presentation. So the history of this system of history decipherment, this arcane history decipherment, King Esarhaddon, the Assyrian king of the 7th century, bragged about writing his name in constellation writing. And whenever you find a pun in the ancient world, it's revered. In fact, the astrologers say, any of the diviners say, you find a word play and you say, a secret of the great gods, the uninitiated shall not see it. We just don't even know what to do with that. Like, we think of wordplay as witticism, humor, but here's Esarhaddon writing his name in pictures and puns embedded in the constellations. Again, so that's where I get the name Lamashi writing. Really, when I write this book and what this book is about, it's about me being a paleopsychologist and trying to gain glimmers of the ancient mind, who recorded the miracle stories in pagan, Jewish, Christian, and Islamic mythology that we don't believe is true anymore because we hold science as valid truth. And what I'm saying is there's another way. There was an entirely different way of thinking back then, and that thinking allowed miracles to be possible. So the idea of viewing constellations as still frames of religious history, I think of them as celestial artifacts. So almost all my time when I did this book I was in an ancient studies room or in my study here with a gazillion books back there. So sometimes I carry my trowel with me just to remind me that when I go through all these boring texts, that it's like scraping away the dirt and you're finding celestial artifacts, the artifacts of the night sky that documented the monumental events that we read about in the Bible, the Quran, and pagan religious mythology. So the idea of pictures in the stars as history is no big deal. The Greeks had a term for it, katasterism, placing among the stars. This is how you became a deity. You did something that was so remarkable that you ended up getting transferred onto the constellations. Here's a picture from the Farnese 2nd century Farnese star atlas. You see a picture of Pegasus, the winged horse, which is a miracle of itself, a flying horse, right? So you see Perseus there on the right carrying Medusa's head. Well, that's a scene from Greco-Roman sacred history. When Perseus sliced off Medusa's head, Pegasus sprang forth. How did they know that was true? There's a picture of it in the stars. You see Cetus, the sea serpent at the bottom. It's a dog-headed sea dragon, okay? And this is the beast that was set loose on Andromeda, who was chained to a rock to, mollify the anger of the sea nymphs, because Cassiopeia, Andromeda's mom, said that, she was more beautiful than every other woman on earth. And so that's why Andromeda had to get sacrificed. So again, it's a miracle. This is literally miracles that are reported as valid, literal history, unequivocal history. So we can start working into the night sky that we look at tonight. Everybody's heard of the Gilgamesh epic, right? So in tablet 6 of the Gilgamesh epic, Gilgamesh and his beloved friend Enkidu, they kill Taurus. They stab Taurus in the neck. And here's a picture of them doing it. The one on the right with the knife is Gilgamesh. The one on the left holding the tail of Taurus the bull is Enkidu. And that is Taurus right there. So
yeah, you wonder if the Mithraeans ever filed a copyright claim on that.
Yeah, no, they should have. So when you read tablets, I'm going to get to that. It's funny you asked that, Elliot, because in a moment I'm going to get exactly to that. So the Gilgamesh epic reads, and I just transliterated the cuneiform, just because I just want you to know that, like, I'm a scholar. I'm not just like going secondhand. I'm translating this stuff when I have to. So it says, and the deity Gilgamesh, like a butcher busting the tablets broken, brave and skilled, in between the nape of the neck, the bristle on the neck of the bull, the horn, and the slaughter spot, he pressed his knife. Okay, the slaughter spot's the jugular of the bull, right? So, and then right after that, a couple lines later, Enkidu, literally, he tore out the Amiti Guana and threw it before her, Ishtar Venus, right? Well, that's a celestial still frame that appears several times every decade. So Enkidu, the Amiti Guana Amiti just means shoulder of the. So shoulder of the Guana, Gu number 4 is cuneiform sign Gu number 4, it means bull, right? And Ana just means of the sky. So it means bull of the sky. It's Taurus. That's Taurus's cuneiform title in star atlases. And he threw it before Ishtar Venus. Well, that's a celestial event. Ishtar is the goddess Venus. She's a planet goddess, right? So several times each decade, you see the vestiges of that bull slaying in our night sky. Taurus is a cutoff at the shoulder, as you see there. It's a protome. It's a cutoff. And several times each decade, Ishtar Venus appears the bull appears in front of Ishtar Venus. So again, it's a stellar still frame. It's a tableau of a historic event. Now, the thing that gets really interesting to me, because now we're talking about Mithras, right? So Mithras is stabbing the bull exactly where Gilgamesh stabbed the bull 2,000 years earlier, right? So now we're talking, late 1st century BC, early centuries AD, right? So there's Gilgamesh. Notice where he's stabbing the bull. It's implacable. It's in the same exact place it's between the horn, the nape, the horn, and the slaughter spot, Okay, that's where Mithras is stabbing the bull. It's always that way, exactly where Mithras is shown stabbing the bull there. Right. So again, remember when I did this book, I've got this wonderful illustrator named Elizabeth Hardy, and so it was during COVID when we were finalizing the book.
Mm-hmm.
So she had to do all the pictures over the phone. So I'm like saying, all this, do that. So in this picture, she probably put the knife a little bit to the right. It should be a little more to the left. But what you're seeing, where Gilgamesh is stabbing the bull, is where the vernal equinox sunrise point is. So it's literally a point in the zodiac. It's on the ecliptic. And the Mithraic religion would say that Mithras is Perseus, the knife-toting champion who stabs the bull, right? Stabs it in where Gilgamesh stabs it 2,000 years earlier. This frees the vernal equinox point through the zodiac and allows it to move. Therefore, I'm sorry, I went ahead. It's Mithras, embodied in the constellation Perseus, who is the cosmocrator, the ruler of the cosmos. All of the star gods conform to Mithras and what he did by loosing the bull's hold on the vernal equinox point. So that's why Mithras was it was the most powerful. I mean, there's Mithraic temples from England to India in the ancient world, as I'm sure you're well aware. So, but there's other scenes third millennium Mesopotamian religious texts discuss a guy named Etana. Literally, his name means ascender of heaven, ascender of the sky. And he's a shepherd boy. He gets carried into heaven by an eagle. Okay. So this happens to Antinous, who is an asterism in Aquila, the eagle constellation, right? So in Greco-Roman religious mythology, there was the practice of pederasty, which is it's an adult male taking a male youth, as his pedophilic lover. Okay, we don't celebrate that today, but they did in Greco-Roman times. So Antinous is said to have sacrificed himself for the Emperor Hadrian. Antinous is the lover. He's like the 12-year-old lover of Hadrian, the emperor. And the astrologers of Hadrian said they saw this new asterism form in the eagle constellation in the form of Antinous. Okay, so this great Sumerian cuneiform scholar named Ben Alster writes that regarding Sumerian religious texts, that these texts speak in favor of the assumption that the astral aspects of the Sumerian gods is as old as Sumerian literature itself. As the evidence stands out, the earliest aspects of Mesopotamian literature seem to be exactly these: celestial function and wisdom literature. It would be a mistake to assume that the astronomic observations could only be expressed through lists of explicitly stated numbers. Numerous Sumerian hymns and myths take place solely on the starry sphere. Okay? So, again, you're thinking of picture stories in the stars as scenes from religious history. Connected to that is the idea of wordplay as divine revelation. Again, we just don't have this concept today. We don't see wordplay as revelation. So to understand how constellation writing could be used as a form of revelation, as a form of a divine decree, you have to understand the solemnity of wordplay in the ancient world, especially in Mesopotamia. So, one of the great scholars along this lines is someone named Scott Nogle. And he, years and years ago, I mean, almost 20 years ago now, writes on his website, when you're talking about writing and cuneiform writing especially, so we tend to think of puns as a literary device, a sign of humor and rhetoric. In antiquity, puns were not used in that way because the conception of words was so different. Writing was considered of divine origins. puns provided diviners with interpretive strategies. And when I say diviners, I'm including the astrologers in there. They're the elite diviners of the ancient world. So he goes on, perhaps because the written word evolved from pictographs in Mesopotamia. Words were considered the embodiment of the object or idea they represented. While we read the word dog and know that it refers to a dog, ancient Mesopotamians would view the word dog as a dog in concentrated form. As a result, individual words contained the power of essence, in this case, the essence of a dog. There was a whole envelope of information that came from every cuneiform sign or part of a word. Remember, you'll see in a moment why that becomes important. Every cuneiform sign was encoded with alternate readings that allowed double entendre to occur in cuneiform writing. In almost every title, every sentence, there's tons and tons of potential for what we would call wordplay. So if you don't believe me, just turn to Matthew's gospel, right? So Jesus says to Peter, he says, and I say to you that you are rock, you're Petros, right? And on this rock, I'll build my church. So Peter, he's saying to Peter, Peter, your name is rock. And on this rock, I'm going to build my church. He uses a pun. So, oh, that's cute, right? Well, the Roman Catholic Church considers that to be the pun that revealed Peter's role as the first pope in the Christian church. The reason I had this emblazoned on my brain and by second grade is I was raised in a devoutly Roman Catholic family. In fact, I'm adopted from a Catholic orphanage in West Philadelphia. And I was taught by nuns and priests from kindergarten through 12th grade. So I knew this by second grade. Like, oh, yeah, Peter's the first pope. How do you know that? Because Jesus said his name means rock, and on this rock, Jesus is going to build his church. So when you start to look at the diviners of the ancient world, people who did things like, especially astrology, but like lamentation chanters, exorcists, straight up diviners, people who sacrificed, animals and read their livers. Okay, these are all forms of divination in the ancient world, and so they tend to refer to a certain phrase that keeps showing up. So they say Matnitzirti, which means hidden words, is Purish tu Sha'ili, which means the secrets of the gods. So what it means is hidden words or puns, what we would call homonyms, homophones, synonyms, double entendre. I like polysemy, which means multiple meanings on a word or phrase, because that's really what it is. Whenever a pun is discovered, you see this admonition, some variation of this. A secret of the great gods, the uninitiated shall not see it. And again, so punning is taken with the utmost seriousness is the only word that comes to mind. So to understand how punning occurs in cuneiform writing, why it's so polysemous, you have to understand the evolution of cuneiform writing. So I'm going to give you, so strap yourself in here, because I'm going to give you the fast pass version. Back in the old days, they used to call, at Disney World, now they call it lightning lane to make it feel more inclusive. Fast, yeah. If you had a fast pass, you walked by everybody like they were second class citizens. So anyway,
and we don't have to pay extra for this one, right?
It's free, right? Yeah, exactly. And there's no extra charge. So here it comes. Okay, get ready. So cuneiform writing is invented by the Sumerians in around 3000 BC. All right. However, they're inhabiting southern Mesopotamia with an increasing number of immigrants who speak another language. They speak what we know the language of Akkadian. This is the language of the Babylonians and the Assyrians. You could say it's the language of the Chaldeans, the Chaldeans. But anyway, so these Akkadian speakers eventually, accrue political clout in southern Mesopotamia until the first Akkadian speaker ascends the throne in the city of Akkad, Sargon of Akkad. So he does this in, like, I believe it's the 24th century BC. I think it's 2334 BC. Anyway, which is where we get the name, the Akkadian. That's where we get the name, right? So these Akkadian speaking peoples eventually, in essence, overthrow the Sumerians, and Sumerian dies as a spoken language by about 1800 BC. So, but they retained it as the sacred language of science and literature. And they retained it especially in what we call Sumerian logograms. These are Sumerian, they're cuneiform signs that represent Sumerian words that stand for Akkadian words. Okay, so let me just state one point. You have no realm of connection to that. The only example I could think of like that in English is the symbol LB, which means pound. LB is the symbol for Libra, the Latin word Libra, which means pound. That's the only example that I can think of that we have in English. There's probably a few others, but that's the only one that comes to mind. In cuneiform writing, there are multiple thousands of these. And so many are there that one of the main texts that the astrologers are studying are these Sumerian Akkadian dictionaries. So you see a cuneiform sign and then all the Akkadian words that this cuneiform sign can mean. And so this is where you start to see the punning show up in cuneiform writing. So Sumerian logograms are lexical equivalencies. That's what the linguists call lexical equivalencies. We would call them synonyms. So linguists always have to make things more complicated. So there's your cuneiform sign on. It just means it's a Sumerian word for heaven. It can also be read Dingir, which means God. Now this cuneiform sign stands for the Akkadian word Shamu, which means skies or heavens. It also stands for the Akkadian word Ilu, which means God. So that's cool. All right. Cuneiform sign on. Okay. It means skies, heavens, and God. I get that. I just want to hammer home one point. The original sign for An or Dingir was the image of a star. There it is in 3000 BC. Remember when that scholar Nogel wrote that cuneiform writing evolved from pictographs? Well, there's your pictograph. The image of a star, is the Sumerian word for God. So the stars are the gods and they're not messing around. So I just wanted to hammer that point home. So now it's really great that An stands for the Akkadian word Shamu, which means skies or heavens. And it can also be read Dingir, which means Ilu, God, in Akkadian. By the way, this is why it took 3 years to learn Akkadian, right? To learn the cuneiform script. So, but it also stands for a whole bunch of other words. So the astrologers knew that it also represented the Akkadian word Ya'u, which means belonging to me. It also could represent Kakabu, which means star. It also represented Shabultu, which means ear of wheat barley. Like it also meant Zukupu, which means impale. It also meant Shah, which means of. It also meant Asaku, which means taboo. And by the way, there's more. I just don't want to over inundate your readers with too much information. So when you wrote that one cuneiform sign, you could get the words skies, heavens, mind, star, barley ear, impaling, of, taboo, and God. And there's more, but that's only one cuneiform sign. Okay? So that's one way that polysemy, multiple meanings on a cuneiform word, shows up in the cuneiform writing system. Here's the other one. Again, we all know what a homophone is. 2, 2, and 2. Like, to your house. I went to your house and I ate 2 donuts and I realized I ate too much. Okay, so 2, 2, 2. There. Okay, But in cuneiform writing, there's so many homophones that the linguists had to actually develop a transliteration scheme so that people reading cuneiform knew what the heck cuneiform's sign was appearing on a tablet. So for instance, you got the cuneiform sign Mul up at the top of your screen there. Well, Mul is the cuneiform sign that means star or constellation. Okay. But there's other ways to write it. You can write it Mul 2. Now, in the ancient world, they didn't write that number 2, that little subscript 2 that you see on the second cuneiform sign down.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the linguists are doing. That lets me know, oh, it's the cuneiform sign whose sign name is Te. And I don't mean to get beleaguered here, but so there's also a Mul 3. There's also a Mul 4 and a Mul 5 and a Mul X, which doesn't show up in the lexicons. It's an esoteric form. Okay. So there are 5 different ways to write the Sumerian logogram that means star or constellation. Mul 2, Mul 4, Mul 5, and Mul X. All right. Here's what's amazing. Every one of those cuneiform signs has other readings. And those other readings mean other words. So that top one, I'm going to go right down them real fast, just to hammer this point home. So the top one, Mul, can also be read Mulu, which means Mumulu in Akkadian, arrow, as in like a bow and arrow, right? Mul 2 can be read Te, which means Ushu in Akkadian. Foundation, it means seam to, which means ornament. It means Sahalu, to pierce. Mul 3 is never used as the cuneiform sign before constellation names for whatever reason. It has other meanings as well. There's a Mul 4, which can also be read Ul, which means distant time and fruit and to be elated. There's also a Mul 5, which means Iku, which is field. It's the equivalent to our word acre. And the Mul X sign, which is used for the word star constellation, is also read Ab. We transliterate as Ab too. They didn't write that little subscript. So when you wrote this one cuneiform sign Mul, it could render star, God, shining brightly, inscription, writing, arrow, foundation, ornament, pierce, wood wash, watercourse, distant time, fruit, filling elated, field, cow, moon, month, and constellation. And that's only some, that's a smidgen. There's more meanings. That's what the astrologers were studying. They were studying these lexicons, and when they read the night sky, they knew the underlying puns that was embedded in every cuneiform sign that was used to write out the constellation titles. So where this stuff shows up unequivocally, everybody knows the Babylonian Genesis is Enuma Elish, right? So in Tablet 7 of Enuma Elish, you have, they give the 50 names of the planet god Marduk, which is Jupiter. Okay, Marduk is just embodiment of the god. It's the deity that embodies the god Jupiter. One of his epithets is Mulding. It's Nibiru, but it comes with these determinatives. The astral determinative Mul means constellation, star. Dingir means god, and then his name is Nibiru. It means crossing. It's the planet Jupiter when it's crossing the meridian. That's why he got that epithet, right? So you see it in, Mulapin Tablet 7. So what they do is they're writing the 50 epithets for Marduk, and then you're just looking at wordplay in how to spell out that cuneiform title. So look at Mul Dingir Nibiru, literally the star deity named Crossing. So the star deity crossing, okay? So when you write that out, you could write it Multu Dingir Netu Biru. That's how you write it in cuneiform, which is why it was such a difficult script, right? So like, oh my God, it's so hard to write in cuneiform, which is why the alphabet's so popular now, right? You had to memorize 600 cuneiform signs. You had to write on clay tablets. You had to carry those things around. They were easy to break. Anyway, so when all they did, I'm just looking at line 128 from Enuma Elish Tablet 7. So they knew that the title was Mul Dingir Nibiru, the god crossing. But they knew that Mul and Dingir had other meanings. Mul could mean Ushapu, which means they cause to appear. Dingir could mean God. It could also mean star, and it could also mean skies or heavens. The number 2 sign they never use for whatever reason. They don't look for any puns in it. They don't find any puns in it.
Mm-hmm.
The B sign means his, and the Ru signs means which and in. And then they just rearrange these words, these lexical equivalencies, and create line 128 of Enuma-Elish Tablet 7. It literally says the god crossing is his star, which in the skies they cause to appear. Okay, and I think when we shared our screen, my formatting got a little messed up there. But so anyway, they do that for 163 lines in Enuma-Elish Tablet 7.
Mm-hmm.
They're reading the celestial writing as if it's a pictographic text, and they're looking for wordplay to find out the details that explain aspects of their history, right? So who knew about this? Well, you got some, clearly Daniel. He becomes the supervisor of all the Babylonian astrologers, right? So there was this process and the phenomenon in the ancient world known as hostage astrologers. It's where vanquishing kings would go in and take the diviners of the ancient world, and especially the astrologers, hostage,
Mm-hmm.
and they would bring them into their own entourage. That's what Nebuchadnezzar II did with Daniel. He made him a hostage, and him and 3 of his countrymen, and brought him into the entourage of Nebuchadnezzar, right? His own entourage. So you talk about the word hostage astrologers. Well, the name Homer means hostage. And there's 2 examples in the ancient world where scholars said that, yeah, Homer was a Babylonian, but he was taken hostage by the Greeks. And then he revealed the astrological secret of how to read the starry sky as a
Mm-hmm.
text. And then he learned Greek, and they utilized that as, as indigenous or autochthonous Greek religious history. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We call them the Greek myths. The Magi show up at Jesus's birth. So they, here's a Jewish child, right? So they know this. It's probably passed along through the tradition of Daniel. And again, Jesus knows it too. I mean, he's a magician. There's a picture of him there raising Lazarus from the dead using a magic wand. Because if you weren't a Jew, if you weren't a Christian, you were a Jew or a pagan, you would assume Jesus was a magician, and that's how he did his magic. So here's how it kind of shows up. I'll try to show you how it shows up in pagan mythology of common pagan, well-known popular pagan mythology of the Greco-Roman world. So Aries, his title in cuneiform text is Luhunga, which literally means the man hired worker. So that's how you write it. And he's a hired worker. His tool is the plow, which is embedded in triangulum, and he's to plow the field which is the Pegasus Square constellation. So that's his job, right? So remember, cuneiforms are really cumbersome scripts, so they're always trying to abbreviate. So a lot of times they abbreviate this to just Lu, the first cuneiform sign. Sometimes they abbreviate to just Hun or just Hunga, but they definitely abbreviate to just Lu, right? So one of the, remember, there's variations of each cuneiform sign. Well, when you do that abbreviation, one of the ways to write Lu, hired worker, it's also the cuneiform sign that can be read Udu and means ram. So that's how this hired worker turned into a ram, Aries the ram. And when you look at that cuneiform sign Lu, it can also be read Si, which means becomes, to become, right? No. So you have the words, the hired worker becomes the ram. I'm pretty sure that's how the hired worker became the ram, right? We would think that's just too simple. Mm-hmm. Not if you think you're getting that this is a divine revelation revealed to you by that deity. Aries is a deity, and it's just revealed to you one of its secrets. And that's how the astrologers are reading these puns. Now, when you look at that top cuneiform sign there, notice it's a composite sign. It's a square sign, and inside it is this crossed cuneiform sign. Well, they're separate cuneiform signs. So Lu is comprised of two different signs. One of them is the Lagab sign. So we just saw that Lu means hired worker, it means ram, and it can be read C, which means becomes. But it's also embodied, it also has the cuneiform sign, that square one's called, it's got a sign, we have like the letter A is named A, but it says ah. The letter B is named B, but it says B, C, K, Well, they had the same thing in cuneiform. These were sign names. The square cuneiform sign is called Lagab, and it can mean to fly or flying. And that crossed cuneiform sign inside of it is the bar sign, and it means gold and fleece. So all of a sudden, you don't have a hired worker turning into a flying, a ram. You have the hired worker becomes the flying gold fleeced ram. So that's probably where the idea of the golden fleece came from. And that's why I footnote this for the scholar. It's written for the layperson. The book's written for the layperson, but it's footnoted for the scholar. But then you just bust out all the other cuneiform signs. Remember, I showed you how many meanings each cuneiform sign can have. And now you just go straight off the cuff Sumerian lexicons and homophones. So Mul, one of its alternate readings is Nab, that means sea. So remember, constellation, hired worker, right? Mul Luhunga. Well, Lu also can be read Udu, ram. Lu embodies the cuneiform sign Lagab, which means flying. It embodies the cuneiform sign Bar, which means golden fleece. It can be read C, which means to become, but it also means Suhuru in Akkadian, which means curly. Well, curly is the name Phrixus. Well, that's one of the boys that flew on the golden fleece's back. And Lu can also, it means man, right? An alternate or a synonym for man is Eli, which means to carry. And Eli, if you were translated into Greek, Eli can be read ele, which the H in hele is just, it's not a letter. So ele can be read ele. So that's the other child that the golden fleece carries on its back, carries Phrixus and hele, right? So the flying golden fleeced ram carries curly and hele. And then hele falls into the sea, okay? And so that's right in there. It's one of the cuneiform meanings for the Hun sign up there in Luhunga. So again, what I'm saying is I accidentally found the queen mother of religious mythology. And I don't mean to say that. I don't say that in any way as a self-aggrandizing statement because I'm a mediocre scholar. There's a whole bunch of people that are better than me in their various fields.
Well, so, on that, you can take that so many ways, right? That you might have heard of Dr. Dennis MacDonald, who Nemesis. So you wonder if, like with Homer, right, where so much of the Bible you see it in the Homeric epics, right?
Yep.
How about the idea that they're both using the same source, not necessarily a direct connection from the Homeric epics?
What I'm saying is Homer was a Babylonian. Homer is probably a group of Babylonians. So what happens is, I don't know if you ever read cuneiform text, the Assyrians had control of various port cities in Syria. And one of the things that plagued them were these Greek pirates showing up, taking hostages. They weren't trying to overthrow the Assyrian government. They were just trying to take human beings. In fact, I think it's Dionysius. Dionysius is taken captive while he's walking on the beach somewhere. Again, they just want to take people and sell them for a ransom. When they came across Homer, they came across people. They're like, hey, what do you know? What makes you valuable? And they're like, I'll tell you what makes me valuable. Those stars you're looking up there are the repository of all knowledge from the ancient world. You just have to know how to read them in cuneiform. And then they said, well, you know what? We're going to teach you Greek, and you're going to help us, read our own history from these stars. That's what I would argue the Greek myths are based on. and
Yeah.
later the Roman myths. And so this whole process, you can just take it to the Garden of Eden. I mean, like, and I don't, Elliot, I'm not trying to sound cocky or anything, but about 1,000 times during my research, I kept saying to myself, I mean, I would just predict, right? Well, the Garden in Eden. Well, Eden is this. Remember those cuneiform signs that were capitalized? Remember, that just means they're Sumerian words, right? Well, Eden is just a Sumerian. It's a Sumerian word for steppe land. It means backcountry or steppe land or wilderness. And I'm like, it can't be this easy. Like, I mean, I'm like, all right, let's take a look at it. So we go back to that tableau, right? So New Year's Day, Mesopotamia, you got a hired worker, right? You got his plow, you got the field that he's supposed to plow, and you have the water god Ea, right? Embedded in Aquarius. This is coming right out of Mesopotamian star atlases like Mulapin, right? Like, no big deal, right? I'm not saying anything noteworthy right now. So, but remember, they're abbreviating, and once this system was passed along to the Jews through Daniel, you had a new way to read the stars and discover your primordial history. So all of a sudden, you remember that the abbreviated term for Luchungas Lu? Well, that can mean ram, but it can also mean man. Well, that's what Adam means. So Adam's right there. So Aries is named Adam in Hebrew, right? And I'm looking at the sign name for that, the field constellation. It's red Iku, but it's literally the Gon 2 sign. And I'm looking at that. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like, Gon, it's the Gon sign, right? Because they're not reading that little number after it. The ancient Mesopotamians were just reading it. It's the sign name Gon. Well, Gon's the Hebrew word for garden. And I'm like, this isn't that hard. You know what I mean? Like, okay, there's Adam. Well, there's a garden. Well, gee, let's take a look at some of the epithets for Ea, the water god, who, by the way, causes the flood. So I'm looking at one of his epithets, his Edim, and that can be read May. And I'm like, May is the verb of being, but it functions. Sumerian scholars know that it sometimes, if you knew Sumerian, you know that it sometimes functioned as a future tense verb of being. It literally rendered, he will be. That's what Yahweh means. It means he will be. So you have Adam, you got a garden, you've got a water deity whose name embedded in Aquarius is named he will be or Yahweh. So I'm like, all right. So where's the Garden of Eden? Oh, I'm like, oh my God, this is like right there. So remember, it's cuneiform writing, it's celestial writing, it's Shetir Shameh. It's the writing of the heavens. So if a cuneiform sign replicated a constellation, that cuneiform sign became the constellation's astroglyph. Remember that cuneiform sign Lagab? Well, that is shaped exactly like, it's a little square, rectilineated there. My illustrator, remember, we were going by phone during COVID. So she made it a little more rectangular than it actually is. But she's awesome though. Elizabeth Hardy is an awesome illustrator, and if you ever need an illustrator, I recommend her. Anyway, so the Lagab sign, and I'm just looking at the lexicon. I mean, I'm just looking at the lexicons the astrologers are reading. So Gon means garden in Hebrew. Okay, it looks just like the Lagab sign. Lagab is going to be its astroglyph. Lagab can be read Ni, which means in. Lagab can be read Nigin, which means east. Lagab is the Sumerian logogram that represents the word Bamatu, which is a synonym for Eden. Eden just means steppe land. It's the Garden of Eden means the Garden of steppe land. It's what it means in Sumerian. So Bamatu means Eden. And I'm like, a garden in Eden in the east. And that becomes like what? Genesis 2, verse 6, I think it is. I don't have Genesis in front of me right this second. I don't have it memorized. But so that's where that comes from. The idea of it's vague. Yeah, the garden's in steppe land in the east, because people are looking for a real place in Mesopotamia. You're not going to find it in Mesopotamia. It's celestial geography. It's in the stars. So you keep going. So yeah, so you end up with a garden in Eden in Steppe land, in the east, right? So it's right there in the stars. So So how does Yahweh Aquarius end up in the constellation, Pegasus Square, the garden constellation? Remember, it was a field in Mesopotamia, but the sign name is gone. And every Hebrew speaker would have known, oh, gone. The sign name's gone. I'm sure Daniel was like, oh, gone. That's our word for Hebrew. That's our Hebrew word for garden. So the astrological tablets like Mulapin refer to the garden constellation as the Shubat of Aquarius, which is the residence of, the dwelling of. So that's how you get the idea that Yahweh is dwelling in the garden, right? And you can just keep going after that. Look at the cuneiform sign for that tool up there, apin, the plow, right? Apin means plow, but it also means reshu, which means to plant in Akkadian. And this square cuneiform sign gon, the one that means field in cuneiform, but is read gon and means garden in Hebrew. It's also read ga, which means to plant. So you get the idea that Yahweh Aquarius, well, what did he do? Well, he planted a garden in Eden in the east. That's where you get the idea. This is where the action's coming from. It's just a stagnant picture, but these word plays are imparting the details and the action. And they're saying, oh my God, I found another pun. And they're writing it down. They're translated into coherent passages, into coherent Hebrew. And I don't mean to, beleaguer the point. So how does Adam get there? How does man get there? Remember, Adam's name just means man, right? So how does man get there? It's just a whole series of wordplay embedded in the original title for Aries, which is Luhunga, okay? It means man, it means whom, it means make, it means in, it means put. And then remember the astroglyph for that cuneiform sign Iku is Lagab. And Lagab can be read re, which means there. Okay. And then you just lay it down. Yahweh put there the man whom he made. Okay. And so where did the serpent come from? Well, remember that cuneiform sign is it's a square constellation, the Pegasus Square. It means garden in Hebrew. Its astroglyph is Lagab. Lagab has about 30 different readings. Okay. One of them, it's equated with Eden, right? But the Akkadian title for steppeland is Tseru. And Tseru is a homonym. The same exact word means serpent, means snake. So the serpent is literally embedded in the Akkadian title for steppeland. So that's where the shape serpent comes from. And then you can just keep going. And again, I'm not going to beleaguer your viewers and break down every cuneiform sign and the meaning. I do that in the book. But you get the words, further wordplay in the original cuneiform titles for Aries and the field and the plow, that was his tool, and Yahweh Aquarius, is you get Yahweh Elohim, because his name also means gods, and I explained that in the book where that comes from. Made from the rib, which he took from the man, turned into the woman. That's literally what the Hebrew said. Yeah. And those correlates are just embedded in wordplay. Luhunga, the original cuneiform title for Aries.
Now, right? Do we also? Excuse me? Okay. Yeah. No, you read my mind. The next slide is the answer to my question.
Yeah. So where does the fruit come from? Well, so remember, Gan has many. What your viewers are not aware of is that these lexical commentaries, where they had these lexicons, really, they're like encyclopedias or dictionaries. They have Sumerian cuneiform sign. They have all the Akkadian words that it represents. So in essence, they're synonym lists. They're what we would call thesauruses. But so remember, the Pegasus Square is written it's written with the cuneiform sign Gon, which means garden in Hebrew, right? So Gon is also, it's also read Asha. And Asha can mean field, right? Remember, the original meaning was field in cuneiform. But Asha renders Inelibi, which means in the middle, right? And Gan also means, we saw it means garden, but Gan can also be read Ashag, and Ashag is a homonym It's actually not a homonym, it's a homophone for the word ashag, which means forbidden. So the Pegasus square itself, that rectilinear cuneiform sign that serves as the astroglyph for the Pegasus square, that means inbu, fruit. So you get fruit in the middle of the garden forbidden. And that's where you get that rendering into the Hebrew. That's probably where it comes from. And again, I'm not going to break it down word for word. I do it in the book, in the Celestial Code of Scripture, but Pegasus square, you find word plays that render tree of life. You find further wordplay that render tree of knowledge of good and evil. Again, I don't want to get pedantic here and bore your viewers, but they're right there in the book. So I will take a minute to do this one. So the chair, I think in English you'd pronounce it cherubim. So you got the cherubim and the flaming turning sword. Like if you found a flaming turning sword that moved on its own accord back and forth, you would know that, wow, this is pretty special. It's impossible. It's a miracle, right? And the cherubim. So you just break it down, so you got Aries right there. So it's written Luhunga. Lu means man, but Lu also means bull. It's one of the cuneiform terms for bull. And a bull, Taurus is a kind of, it's a temu, which means a protector spirit. Bull can also be written pirig, which can be read ud, which means east. The hun in Luhunga can mean at and from. In lexical commentaries, you see the hun sign is read gi, and it is represented by rubu, who actually pronounce it rubu, which it literally means prince. But so you have gibubu, and that's literally the word cherubim. And it's literally a plural word too.
Yeah.
So nobody really knows what the cherubim are. They make, I'm saying it's coming right out of cuneiform lexical equivalencies that use the cuneiform sign hun, and they say it's read gi, and it represents the word wubu. And these are often these princes come and fight for allied armies. So in some of their examples where you see them in, for instance, like this Chicago Assyrian Dictionary and stuff like that. Anyway, that's where you get it. That's not like sort of the word cherubim. Mm-hmm. That's a one-to-one equivalence. The I am is in cherubim is the plural ending in Hebrew. It's the equivalent of a U with a circumflex over it in cuneiform. Yeah. Anyway, Lagab, that square cuneiform sign, that's the astroglyph for the garden constellation. Well, it also is read gear, which means sword, and flaming and turning. And it's, as we saw earlier, it's read Nagim, which means east. So you have Yahweh placed the cherubim in the flaming turning sword east from the garden. And that's literally what it says in Hebrew. So if you wanted to find out where like the celestial floodwaters and the arcs are, there's two of them, by the way. There's two flood heroes arcs. So I'll just show you where they're at. So the celestial floodwaters. So in case you're not familiar with the starry sky, there's 8 contiguous aquatic constellations. There's the goatfish, the dolphin, the water god Aquarius, the southern fish, the Cetus, the sea serpent, the river constellation, Pisces, the fishes, and Argo, the boat, right? So what's really intriguing about the flood story is it kind of shows up out of nowhere. So cuneiform's writing is invented in 3000 BC, yet almost 1,000 years pass before you get your first mention of a flood. And it's in the Sumerian King list, which dates to about 2050 BC. So where does this flood come from? Because it comes out of the blue. The Sumerians don't have a flood story. There's a Sumerian flood story, but it's written by Babylonians who are writing in Sumerian as a sacred script in the same way that the Catholic Mass used to be said in Latin because it was considered a sacred script of the Catholic Church. So where does it come from? Well, it comes right out of the stars. So you got this wet region of the night sky, right? You have In the Bull constellation, the Hyades is referred to as the Agu of this the sky god and An, or Anu in Akkadian, right? And I'm looking at Agu and I'm like, nah, just Agu means crown, but it also means devastating flood. It's a straight up homonym. Like it's just a straight up homonym in the way we have the word a bear in the woods and to bear a child, right? So, so I can just see they're looking at this celestial writing and saying, wait a minute, there's a devastating flood up here. They're seeing this as a history book. And they're like, well, we got to figure out, what happened. That's why you would think if this was based on a historic event depicted in the stars, you would get your most detailed stories. The earliest stories would be most detailed, whereas the earliest stories regarding the flood are the least detailed. In fact, they don't have anything. There's no ark, there's no flood hero, there's no denouement, there's no bird release theme, nothing like that. So where does it come from? Well, if you want to define, it comes, that's what I'm saying. It comes out, I go into the more in depth in the book. But so one of the cuneiform, the only boat constellation in cuneiform writing, I'm sorry, I've been talking a lot, is the Magor boat. Right? It literally means the Gor sign. It's written Ma2 Gor 8, right? That's what the cuneiform signs linguists would render those cuneiform signs, right? It's a boat constellation. It's a deified boat constellation. So it's a god too. It's a deified prop. It's listed among the southern, not this specific location, but it's listed among the southern constellations. And in a very popular Sumerian myth called Gilgamesh and Aga, in line 98 of that myth, a Magor boat gets its bow chopped off. So in cuneiform literature, the Magor boat, it's a ship constellation. It's positioned in the southern region of the night sky. It's a deity. And it gets its bow chopped off. And by the way, it's also the original flood boat. So the original flood boat, the first reference to it is in the tale of Atrahasis, which is the oldest flood story, which dates to like 1700 BC. Anyway, literally, this constellation renders Ma means boat. Ma number 2 means boat. The Gor 8 sign can be read Uru 5, and it means devastating flood, right? So we're looking for a boat constellation, southern region of the night sky. It's deified, and it gets its bow chopped off, right? So I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there. I'm a slide ahead. Anyway, so the original flood boat can be seen in Argo, right? So the Argo is amongst this celestial flood, right? And it is the original flood boat. And I'll show you why this Magor boat, this flood boat, eventually becomes the Argo, right? So the Magor is a ship constellation. It's a deity. It's listed in the southern region of the night sky and has its bow chopped off in Sumerian scriptures. Well, the Argo is a deified ship constellation positioned in the southern region of the night sky, and it has its bow sliced off. The prow of the ship's just missing, like as if it's been cut by scissors. And there's tons of references to that in mythology and in star atlases. So the interesting thing for me, because I'm not a linguist, but I play one in podcasts, so I'm always looking for word plays that make some really intriguing sense. So the Magor, after it gets its bow chopped off, is the stern of a ship, right? Well, the word stern in Akkadian, which is the Babylonian and Assyrian language, it's arku. And if you translated arku into Greek, you get argu. You get Argo. That's how you spell Argo. It's, it's Argo. That's how you would render it. So the word stern in cuneiform renders swift in Greek, and that's what the Argo means. That's what Argo means. Argo means Greek, swift in Greek. So that's probably how the flood boat, the original flood boat, came to be embedded in the Argo. However, when you turn to the Gilgamesh epic, tablet 11, excuse me, tablet 11 of the Gilgamesh epic, that's the flood story. Now, in that flood story, the ark is an iku. It's a field. there's a newsflash. There's no such thing as a field boat. They don't make them. Okay, they don't exist. So I'm like, but if you're looking in the stars, they exist. So remember, it's a celestial floodwaters. It's being defined by the Hyades constellation right above those floodwaters in Taurus. The Hyades, it's Agu, which is the word crown, but Agu is also the word for flood. And when you look at the field constellation, remember, don't believe me. Just go get the transliterated tablet 11 of the Gilgamesh epic, and you'll see that the flood boat, the prototype, is an iku. It means field. It's that cuneiform sign, the Gon sign. So where is this flood boat? Well, it's the Pegasus Square is floating at the limits of right on the edge of the celestial sea. It's defined as a celestial flood because of the Hyades asterism, which is Agu, which means crown and floodwaters simultaneously. So again, a typical scribe wouldn't know that. An astrologer or a diviner would know that, because they would be studying all the potential word plays that are embedded in these cuneiform titles. So the reason that's intriguing to me is that's where we get our word for the Hebrew word for ark, Noah's Ark, right? So the Hebrew word for ark is, look at the bottom of your screen there. And I wrote, it says Tebat equals ark. Well, look at that middle spelling in italics. It says Tebat equals ark. That's the Hebrew word that's the archaic, and now you'll see it translated as Teva. But in the original Hebrew, those H vowels were T's. The H suffix is a T. So rest assured, the original pronunciation, if you went back and you were talking to someone who was a patriarch of Judaism, they would say Noah's Ark is a Tebat. Okay, well, when you look at the cuneiform spelling, now look at the top of your scheme where it says mul/te iku, right? Okay, here it goes. That's the mul-2 sign. Remember, these cuneiform signs all have names. If I were talking to you and we were cuneiform scholars, I'd say, yeah, I wrote the te sign. That's what the mul-2 sign is. It's the te sign. And when you write the word constellation in front of iku, which is the Gon sign, it literally says, it says te Gon or te iku. However, remember, cuneiform sucks to write in. It's awful. It's a cumbersome script. So they're always looking for shortcuts. That's why they like Sumerian logograms, because I can use one cuneiform sign when I would have to use 4 in my own Akkadian language. Mm-hmm. So the cuneiform sign te, they wanted, the Aku sign is also the cuneiform sign for box. It's read Ga 2, if you wanted to be specific, right? So, but they're like, that sucks. Look at all, I'd have to use 1, 2, 3, 5 wedges. I'm going to use the abbreviation. I'm going to use bot, the cuneiform sign bot, P or bot. So if you were writing the constellation box, you would know that the full spelling is te iku, which is at the top of your screen, which would have been read te ga, right? But you would have said, well, that sucks. I'm not using 5 wedges when I can use 2. So I'm going to write the bot sign, te bot, right? And te bot is how you get the word Tebat. That's the Hebrew word for Noah's Ark. So they're literally, when you read the cuneiform word for Noah's Ark, it literally says constellation box or constellation chest, right? So the reason that's so fascinating to me is it explains the most bizarre line in the Quran. So in the Quran, there's two places where the flood waters come from out of an oven, a tanur, literally, it's a cooking oven, right? And I'll just give you one of them in Surah 11, verses 40 through 44. It says, so they're talking about Noah, built an ark. And when our Allah, they're talking about, will was done and the water welled up from out of an oven, out of a tanur, we said to Noah, take into the ark a pair from every species, your tribe, and all the true believers, right? So in the Quranic flood story, the flood waters come out of an oven. That's an oven, right? I've excavated these in Syria, right? It's a tanur. It's a little cooking oven. They usually use it to cook bread, right? So how in God's name, how in Allah's name could the world be covered in water that emanated from that? That would take forever. And imagine the amount of water pressure you would need for that. You would have this water spout that would go up into like space, right? So it's not, if you're reading celestial writing, it's not a big deal. So remember that McHugh sign. So you got this arc constellation floating on celestial flood waters. It's literally a box, right? So its original cuneiform title was Iku, right? And Iku, it means field, but it has a whole bunch of other meanings. One of them is nasu, if I remember correctly, it's pronounced nasu. And nasu is just a verb that means to carry floodwaters. Okay, because remember, irrigation is incredibly important in Mesopotamia. It's literally how you water your crops. So they knew all about floodwaters. And so they had many words for flood and flooding and floodwaters. So to carry floodwaters is one of the titles for that Gon sign that stands for the garden and also stands for the ark. So it means carry floodwaters. It means box and chest. And it also, the astrolith is, remember that Lagab sign? It's got like about 30 different readings. And one of them is gear, which just means oven. So you get the oven carries floodwaters. So it's an arc constellation, but it's also an oven that carries floodwaters through homophones and homonyms and synonyms. And again, it's way easier to see in the footnotes of the book, but I'm trying to give you a visual of how this absurd concept made its way into the Quran. It has a lot of logic to it if you believe that picture stories in the stars are inviolable scenes from history, and wordplay defines the action that's taken part. So, Samson's execution of 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey, right? Pretty absurd. You got to say to yourself, how did jawbone not smash apart when you're using it as a mace to hit 1,000, armed warriors in the head? Well, if you look at Samson's name in Hebrew, remember Hebrew goes right to left. It's Shimshon. In Shimshon, the WN in Shimshon is the diminutive. It's like the et in kitchenette, right? Et just means like little, right? So kitchenette is little kitchen. In the same, say, shimish un. Shimish just means son. Un means little or diminutive. So it means diminutive son, little son. That's what Samson name means. So well, that's kind of weird. But so where could you find a warrior named Little Son? Well, if you look at the Hades asterism in Taurus, that Hades asterism, remember its original title was Agu, which means crown, also means flood, but it's got a whole bunch of meanings. And it means crown, but it's equated with other logograms. And one of them is the main sign. And main also means son, and main also means sharu, which means king, and it's a homonym that means infant. So embedded in the Hyades asterism is a title that means infant son, baby son, little son, shimshun, diminutive son. That's probably where that idea came from. Then you go further and well, wait, look at this Hyades asterism is embedded in Taurus, which is written with the Gu4 sign. And Taurus, Gu4 can mean bull, it can mean warrior, and it can also mean literally Shumu, which means a name. It also can mean Nabu, which means to name. So you get a warrior named infant son. So all of a sudden, this Hyades asterism, through wordplay, embodies a great warrior named infant son, or Shemshun, Samson. And so, well, how do we get the jawbone of a donkey? Well, you look at Taurus, remember, there's about, I'm going off dead reckoning here, but if I remember, there's 13 different ways to write Taurus's title. And one of them is Pirig. Pirig just means bull, right? But it can be read gear, I think it's gear 3. And gear 3 means donkey. So the Hyades asterism that embodies Samson, it's also the jawbone of the bull, right? So Samson's name, little son, is embedded in the Hyades asterism, and one of the titles for the Hyades asterism is jawbone. It's the jawbone of the bull, but since one of the cuneiform titles for bull is donkey, it's also the jawbone of the donkey. Now, one of the Sumerian titles for jawbone is in the lower left there. It says EC, jawbone, and it says Sumerian. Well, if you were an erudite astrologer, you were multilingual, you knew cuneiform, you knew Sumerian, you knew Akkadian, you knew Hebrew, probably knew Greek, probably knew some other language. You were creme de la creme. So one of the ways to translate the Sumerian EC is EC, and EC is it's called a construct form of the word for jawbone. Isu is jawbone. Is just means jawbone of the. C can mean donkey. So you have jawbone of the donkey. And all this is footnoted in the book so that you know, because if you don't know cuneiform, you might think, well, this guy's bamboozling me. He's pulling a fast one on me. He knows something about cuneiform and he's trying to pull the wool over my eyes. I put the footnotes in there so you know that that's not what I'm doing. Like I'm this boring, mediocre scholar, but the footnotes don't lie. So please look at them and forget the book. So, and then Samson grabs the jawbone of the donkey. It comes right out of it. So one of the titles for bull is Lu. Lu forms a homonym with it's the Sumerian logogram Lu, which can mean man, it can mean bull, it can mean to grab, it can mean ram. It's got many readings, and so you get Samson grabs the jawbone of the donkey, and then you just go further. The brightest star in the bull constellation is Aldebaran, which is the eye star. It's literally the bull's eye, right? Word for eye in Sumerian is Igi, which can also mean 1,000. Igi can be read Gi, which means to kill. Taurus, we just saw, can be read Lu, which also means man. So you get Samson kills 1,000 man, which is exactly how it shows up in the Hebrew. So that's just probably how the idea of Samson killing 1,000 men with the jawbone of the donkey is connected to celestial wordplay. So how was Jonah swallowed by Ketis, the sea serpent constellation? So let me just go into that for a second. The reason this is so fascinating is the Hebrew says that Jonah was swallowed by Dagdavol, the giant fish, right? And the Greek Old Testament, and in quotations of Jesus in the Gospels, and in early Christian iconography, Jesus isn't swallowed by a big fish. He's swallowed by Ketis. It's a dog-headed sea serpent. I can assure you no fisherman ever caught that species. They don't exist on Earth, okay? The only place they exist is as a constellation. I don't know if I show in the next line. The only time you're going to find Ketis is as a constellation in the night sky. It's the sea serpent constellation, sea dragon constellation. So how did this come about? Well, who is Jonah? Well, remember that Magor boat, the original title for the Argo, which was the original flood boat? It literally, cuneiform signs are Ma and Gur. They mean boat, literally boat flood. But the Gur 8 sign, which can be read Uru, which means devastating flood, Gur 8 is also the word for dove. Well, that's what Jonah means. Yonah means dove in Hebrew. So the Ma 2 sign, here now I'm dealing with the homophone. Ma 2 means boat. The Ma 1 sign means prophet, Nebu in the Akkadian. So you have, through homophone, you have the so the boat Magor, wordplay in this is wordplay in the original title for Argo, the Magor boat, is the prophet Jonah, the prophet dove. And so there's an image of it in the drawing there. So now here's Jonah. So, okay, so we can say Jonah's embodied in the Argo. But how did they come up with the idea that Yahweh provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah? Remember, anytime you see the cuneiform sign May, anything that can be read May in Sumerian can render he will be, which is the future tense form of the verb of being. Okay, that's what Yahweh means. So one of the ways to read the Hyades is with the cuneiform sign. It's the cuneiform sign main, which can be read May. May just means he will be. It's very likely they're envisioning that as the embodiment of Yahweh. Okay, and then you have the sign, the cuneiform sign for Taurus. It can be read the Gu sign. It's Gu 4, but it can be also be read Gu 3, which means to swallow, and the Gu 3 sign is also read Gar, which means to provide. So you have all of these words embedded in the celestial writing, but the key one is in Enuma, the dragons are referred to. There's 3 dragons embedded in Tiamat. By the way, after she gets slayed by the planet god Marduk, she gets placed in the sky. She becomes the celestial sky, right? Part of this, the wet region of the celestial sky. And these dragons are referred to as Mulmach. As Mushmach. Okay, Mush just means dragon or serpent. Mach just means gigantic. So it means you got huge serpent, giant serpent. However, Mush isn't just a serpent, it's also a kind of fish, probably an eel. So somebody understood that Mushmach, although it renders huge serpent, also rendered huge fish. The only person who would know this is somebody who was bilingual in Hebrew and cuneiform. And one of those, the first one that comes to mind is Daniel, someone in the tradition of Daniel. Okay, so it's very likely that this is how the authors of Jonah came to the conclusion that in the Hebrew Bible, Jonah is swallowed by a huge fish. But in the New Testament and in Christian iconography, Jesus is swallowed by the sea serpent Ketus, right? So do you think Jesus knew this? Well, he's a magician. Now, if you're not a Christian, the Jews and pagans said that he was a magician. He certainly would have known this kind of wordplay. He would have been longing for such a wordplay, and he would have understood, which is why Jesus knew Hebrew. So he's like, wait a minute, he uses cards here. He says, wait a minute, it's a big fish in Hebrew, but I'm going to translate that into Greek as ketos because it's a stellar picture story. And I know that you could render ketos as giant serpent or giant fish in Hebrew. But I know that when you render it in Greek, it becomes ketos. It's only one way in Greek, and that's ketos, which is the sea serpent that we know of from the night sky. So if you want to do rediscovering the star of Bethlehem amid the stellar tableau of Jesus' nativity, that's one of the chapters in the book. So I just show you that, so everybody's looked for the star of Bethlehem, the star of Bethlehem. What is it? It's this. It's a comet. It's an alignment. Well, if you're, remember, both Matthew and Luke refer to this child as the anointed child. It's the Messiah, right? It's the Christ child. So the brightest star in Leo is referred to as Sharu, which means king, and it's also a homonym for child. And in fact, in some instances, in the late cuneiform tablets dating to about the time of Christ, just before the time of Christ, um, this cuneiform sign is literally written with the Sumerian logogram for child. It's Tur, the Tur. But Sharu is equated with the cuneiform sign Me, and Me can mean Pashishu in Akkadian, which means anointed one. It's the Sumerian logogram that means Christ in Greek, Christos in Greek. So this child is a divine child. It's a deity, and it's also an anointed child. It's the Christ child. So if you said to me, and by the way, the Christ child and king, that's exactly what Matthew and Luke described this child as, and it's exactly what the Magi described this child as. They knew he was a king and a child. So if you said, well, how did that come about? Well, the story of Jesus's birth, remember, when Matthew and Luke went to write down Jesus's birth, they had no eyewitness testimony to draw from. What they knew is that Jesus was the Messiah, and his name's Christ, means anointed one, and they knew he was considered the Son of God, which is why so much of his testimony was blasphemous. So you're looking for this divine child constellation, but you're like, wait a minute, is there more to the story up there? Well, I want you to take a careful look at Virgo there, and the woman in the bottom of the picture holding that wheat spike in her left hand, spica. Well, her northwestern stars embody the Mesopotamian pregnancy goddess, and this asterism bleeds into the tail of Leo. Her title, one of her titles in cuneiform, is Eru, and the title literally means to be pregnant. So now you have this image of Virgo, and you have the words in the northwestern stars and asterism embedded in Virgo. You have the words to be pregnant. Very likely, this is your pregnant Virgo. Very likely, this is your pregnant virgin. And the star, the anointed child star, is just slightly to the west in the form of Regulus, the brightest star in Leo, right? But if you look a little closer, the cuneiform, the full cuneiform title for Virgo is obscene, and it means pharaoh, as in agricultural pharaoh. But they often, remember, they're always trying to shorten. They're always trying to shorten. And if you shortened obscene to just ob can represent the Akkadian word maratu, which literally represents the word bitter, and it literally represents the word sea. So remember, one of the hypothetical meanings of Mary's name, Mariam, means, bitter sea. You have the pregnant virgin, bitter sea. So you have a pregnant virgin named Bitter Sea, or Mariam, positioned a short distance from an anointed child star. Okay? So, and then you can just go, you just bust down all the words. There's a gazillion word plays here, and I go into the book. I'm going to write an extensive article on this that I hope that gets published in a scholarly journal before Christmas, but the book will do the trick. So when you look at all the word plays embedded in Regulus, you get this slew of wordplay because it's a really popular star. It's a really popular asterism in Leo. So you get the words, the star went before them until, having come, it stood over the house where the child was. That's literally what the cuneiform renders. And that's literally what this star did. The star leads the astrologers, and by the way, there's the word 3 astrologers up there, and leads them to Jerusalem. They meet up with Herod. Herod gets together with his priests and scribes. Then the star hangs a left and goes 5 miles south and parks itself over the house where the child is. And I'm like, it says the place, and then the next line says, no, it's oikos. It's house. It's the house, right? And so I'm like, this is coming right out of the stars. There's no, it's not an alignment. It's not some kind of comet that nobody could explain. Stars don't align themselves over someone's house. You destroy the whole earth with that. In fact, even some of the saints, St. John, the golden-tongued one, Chrysostom, that saint complained that there's just no way a star in the sky can be seen over one celestial body. It doesn't allow you to triangulate. It doesn't work scientifically. So you got to give them credit for looking scientifically. But if you're looking for wordplay and you believe that this is inviolable truth, these word plays, then it's right there. What the star did is right there. So you might say, well, wait a minute. That's not what Luke says. Luke says that this pregnant woman gives birth in a caravanserai where there was no room. So they're out in the courtyard with all the animals, and they had to use a feeding trough as a makeshift crib. That's basically what it says, right? Well, you just look at the cuneiform title, the cuneiform word. So remember the cuneiform sign Regulus, right? Well, Regulus is written with the celestial determinative. One is the Mul-2 sign, which is positioned right there. So it means star, but it also means to lie or to place, right? Sharu is an infant. The Sumerian title for Sharu is Lugau. It means king. And that also is a type of fine cloth. The constellation that the Christ child is embedded in is Leo, okay, which is a lion. It's written, can be written which means lion, but it also means Ina, which is in Akkadian. And Leo can also be written Labu, which means lion, but it also means to wrap up. And M44 in Cancer, the next constellation west of the Regulus, the infant Christ child star, is a manger. It's the manger, it's Fatne. So when you look at the word plays, and I'm just giving you the marquee word plays here, you get an infant child wrapped in cloth lying in a manger. This is the sign that Luke says will mark the Christ child. You will find him, an infant wrapped in cloth, swaddled, and lying in a manger. And that's right out of the night sky. And so when people say to me, oh, I think it's a comet. No, I don't think so. I think when you find every single word from Luke's story and every single word from Matthew's story, they're totally incongruous. They're literally two different stories because they're reading word plays and polysemy in this same tableau. They're looking at the same stellar picture story. Luke's including the manger into it. Matthew's including, there's an astrologer. There's a wordplay conveys the idea of astrologers. And Matthew's also including Hydra. And I go into that in the book. It's probably Hydra's probably the representation of Herod. Hero's ode. That's what his name means. So anyway, so that's probably how that came about. So then Jesus' celestial sea walk, right? So again, I'm not trying to get pedantic here. I'm just trying to really fascinate your viewers because, you know, I am your average bear. Like there's a whole bunch of scholars way better than me in the linguistics and art history and archaeology. Like every conference you go to, there's tons of them better than me, but they're not asking the same question. I'm saying, how did Jesus walk on water? They would say, well, that's unprovable, so I'm not even going to try to explore it. I'm playing psychologist. I'm saying, yes, there is a way to explain this, and I want to find the explanation. That's because I was raised devoutly Roman Catholic, and I'm constantly trying to reconcile the two meanings. Let me just turn on my light here. We got a thunderstorm coming into Salt Lake City. Anyway, Jesus' celestial sea walk. So what most people don't realize, if you look at Hesiod says that Orion walked on water 700 years before Jesus did. And if you wanted to prove how he did this, well, there's a picture of him doing it in the night sky. When you plot Orion on a star atlas, his front foot is in Eridanus, the river constellation, and he's stepping out on the 8 contiguous aquatic constellations that demarcate an ocean in the heavens, a sea in the heavens. He's walking on the heavenly sea. Now, you might say, well, how? Remember, Matthew, Mark, and John write down Jesus a sea walk story, and they're totally incongruous. I mean, they say three different things, and I'll go into that in a second. But what they would have been looking for, they don't have any eyewitness testimony. But what they would have known, they would have said, well, look, we know Jesus is the Christ. We know he's the Son of God. And we know he's the anointed one. So we're looking for the word anointed one. And we're looking for an epithet like Son of God. So you look at some of the cuneiform titles for Orion. Remember, the authors of the Gospels are indoctrinated in Mesopotamian astrological lore. They knew the stars were a celestial text, right? Orion's one of his cuneiform titles, if you look up there, Dingir Damu, literally the deity S-O-N, the deity sun, as in S-O-N, the sun deity, the sun god. And then another one of his epithets is Mulsukal, which just means messenger, the constellation messenger, but it also, Sukal is also a logogram for Pashishun Kaden, which means anointed one. Sorry. I mean, it's just right there. I mean, I almost want to apologize. I'm like, look, I'm sorry. I know you guys have been studying this for 2,000 years and haven't really found the answer, but it's like right there. So you got Matthew, Mark, and John have no eyewitness testimony to go off of. They have the belief, though, that pictures in the stars frame inviolable scenes from history. I got this guy named Sun, divine Sun, sun deity, S-O-N, and anointed one. And you look at all the word plays in Dingir Damu. Remember, earlier I pointed out that Damu meant sun. Dingir means God, but it also means Shah in Akkadian, which means of. So you got the Son of God. So word plays call Orion the Son of God and the Anointed One. I'm pretty sure that's how Matthew, Mark, and John figured out that this is how Jesus walked on water. This is how they learned that Jesus walked on water. So then you just go a little bit further. To prove that Jesus walked on water, again, I'm just going off of a couple of the epithets, the cuneiform epithets for Orion, okay? Dingir Damu and Dingir Sukal, okay? And I've given you some of the word plays. Sukal, of course, means anointed one, which is Christ. The mul sign, one of the mul sign, the one I'm using here, can be read shuhub. And shuhub means to tread upon, to step upon. Okay? Mul can also be read knob, and knob it means sea. It's a Sumerian term for sea. So you have Orion, Son of God, Christ, treads upon the sea. That's how they knew Jesus walked on water. Okay? And then so this gives all new meaning to that whole picture story. So now all of a sudden we have Orion. He's the Son of God and he's the Christ. He's Jesus. Okay. He's walked on water. So now I know it. So now I just look for other aspects of the story. And but by the way, I'm not going to go word for word on this. So remember, Jesus walks in Matthew, Mark, and John's version of this story. Jesus goes up on a mountain to pray. And then he walks down from the mountain, then he walks on water. Well, and he does it alone, right? So notice behind Orion is a mountain constellation. And there's a snake constellation, right? Well, Gemini, the constellation right behind Orion, just to the northeast, is the Twins constellation. But in Mesopotamia, it's a twin mountain constellation. It's not a twin. It can be twin humans, but if you don't believe me, Gilgamesh climbs them. I think it's Tablet 6. He climbs this mountain in the Gilgamesh epic. He climbs Mount Mashu, it's called, the Twins constellation. And Hydra is one of its epithets is Ushum, which means horned serpent. And Hydra, Ushum, can represent Edishu, which means it means to be alone. So this is where the idea that Jesus went up alone on a mountain. One of the terms for Taurus means alu, which just means to pray. So that's all there. So everything Jesus does in his prelude to his sea walk is embedded in this stellar picture story. The discrepancies in the story are also embedded as puns. And I don't really go into it. I'm not going to go into it here in this version, but one of the titles for Orion is Shubu, which just means sun. Excuse me. Shubu means stone or rock, which means Peter in Greek, which is probably how they got the idea that Peter walked on water too. And then everything else that happens, their dialogue, all embedded as wordplay. That's my next book, actually, right now. It's called The Witnessing Jesus' Celestial Sea Walk. I'm going to probably publish it through Monkfish. But it's just a deep dive into the whole celestial sea walk that Jesus does. So anyway, all the I wrote this in Archaeoastronomy and Ancient Technologies. If you look that up, it's in an article I wrote, and I go more in depth in there because it's a scholarly journal. But one of the things in Mark 6:48, Jesus walks by the discipleship. So he goes up on a mountain to pray. He sees there's a strong wind. He sees the disciples' boat floundering, and then Mark says he meant to walk by them. He willed to walk by them, and you're like, whoa! He walked by the disciples' ship on the night that I thought the point was to save them. Well, that may be the case. He may have come back to the ship, but the reason that Jesus was probably seen to walk past the boat is, first, Orion's head's always turning around looking backwards. So he's called in Egypt, he's called the turned around one. He's looking backwards. But one of his cuneiform site titles is written U, and just the letter U. And this U sign can mean to intend or to cause to pass by something. So literally embedded in one of the titles for Orion is the words to cause to walk by, to intend to walk by, which is what you see in the Greek, right? And so just to hammer home the point, one of the titles for that Magur boat, the ship Constellation, so it literally can be rendered the apprentice's ship, and that's what Matthias in Greek means. It means someone apprenticing. Disciples means to apprentice under, a skilled person. And so one of the ways to read Magur is, you could read it as the flood ship. You could write it as the boat dove, like as in Jonah. But can also read it as the discipleship. Anyway, this ship in John's gospel, it teleports 3 or 4 miles to the other side of, the Sea of Galilee, and it's instantaneously. And you would think, why didn't they write this down? Well, that's all embedded as wordplay in this celestial picture story. So I just wanted to turn to just explain that there's way more. What interests me is the reconciliation of the literally irreconcilable aspects of the story. I love doing that. As someone who's raised devoutly Roman Catholic, you find a decoder that explains what it means. So to get to the last section of the presentation, the Quran in 2 different places refers to itself as a celestial tablet preserved in heaven or in the sky. And it's mentioned numerous times in the hadiths. So how could that come about? How could the Quran be a celestial tablet retained in heaven? Well, you learn about it when you realize that Muhammad was illiterate. He's trained by Simon al-Farsi, who's a magus. He's a magician. He knows the Hebrew mythology. He knows Christian mythology. He knows pagan mythology. He also knows Mesopotamian mythology. And you see his tutorials with Muhammad remember, he's reciting celestial mythology, and Muhammad is memorizing it and then recounting that in recitations to his pagan Arab tribe, right? That's why the Quran is called, Quran means the recitation, the recital, if you will, right? So this celestial underpinnings of the Quran shows up in several of the chapters. Like chapter sort of 53 is called Al-Najm, the star. Sort of 54, Al-Qamar, the moon. Sort of 85, Al-Buruj, the zodiac. Sort of 91, Al-Shams, the sun. Could you imagine if biblical passages had these titles? Like Al-Najm, the star, the star, the zodiac, the sun, the moon. Like you'd be like, whoa, that's pagan.
Mhm.
And you're like, it is pagan. The Quran is 100% truly pagan. And this is an example of at least pagan under foundation. So one of the things that's interesting, if you walk around in various places like Petra, you'll see thousands of what they look like picture frames etched into the rock, or even windowsills. And they're etched into the rock so that you can put the image of the deity there and you could pray and worship your deity. Okay. So this is the Nabatean goddess. This is pagan Arab worship. So it's very likely that this bled into the idea of the celestial tablet being kept in heaven, and that Allah being a deity in heaven. So remember that Pegasus Square constellation? Well, remember, it's the Pegasus Square. Its astroglyph is, the cuneiform astroglyph is Lagab, that square cuneiform sign. Well, Lagab is equated with the words Leu, which is a tablet. And because it's an astroglyph, it's talking about the sky. So it's Muleu, which means celestial tablet. So Lagab, the Pegasus Square, the astroglyph is a celestial tablet. However, the Pegasus Square is also written with another cuneiform title, which is E, and E, which means field. It can also mean, it means kabu, which means to name. And it also means to recite or reciting. So wordplay embedded in cuneiform titles for the Pegasus Square can render a celestial tablet named the reciting, or Al-Quran, which means the Quran. And the Quran itself says it's a celestial tablet, kept a preserved tablet in heaven, a celestial tablet in heaven. And then when you look at the Sumerian cuneiform, Sumerian Akkadian dictionaries is what I like to refer them as. You see one term that goes, it refers to the Pegasus Square. It calls it U is Ilu. Literally, it means the Pegasus Square is Ilu, the god. So it literally says the Pegasus Square is the god. That's literally what it says. And remember, Allah means the God. It's a the vowel elides. I think it would technically be written al-illah, but because the vowels elide, you get Allah. Okay, and it means the God. So literally, that's found in a cuneiform tablet that's equated with Pegasus, the Pegasus Square. So what I'm saying is that's where you get this idea of these rectilinear objects being the squares I talked to you about that look like picture frames cut into the rock. They're called Beitels. They're called house of the god. They're little houses of the god, and you put the image of the god in them, and they're all rectilinear. And I'm like, they're not round. They're always square or rectilinear. And I think it's coming right out of the stars that they're reading. They know the Quran is a celestial tablet in heaven. It's Lumashi writing. It's constellation writing. And Salman al-Farsi dictated this wisdom to Muhammad. And Muhammad recited it as autochthonous Islamic revelation. It's Islamic scripture. Okay. So in the end, the book's called The Celestial Code of Scripture, the Astral Cipher Underlying the Miracle Stories of the Bible and the Quran. I hope that wasn't too pedantic. I just, I get a little passionate, so I just wanted to
Mhm.
go through that. And I hope I explained it well enough. As you can see, I come equipped with slideshow because this stuff is heavy duty linguistics, and the pictures matter. They are the data. The pictures are the
Yeah.
celestial artifacts de- depicted in heaven.
Yeah. Now, there's so much to say about that, and the kind of parallels you can draw, right? With Orion always looking over his shoulder, right? He's
Turned around
passing
looking
by.
backwards. Yeah.
Yeah. That throughout the New Testament, we find strangely the verb to pass by. I would say it's quite overused, or I don't want to say it like that's a critique of the writer, but it's disproportionately used as much as you would think, right?
Yep.
So I'm
Yeah.
inclined to think.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm saying that. Yeah, sorry, Elliot.
Oh no, yeah, go on.
And what I'm saying is, when you get these peculiar statements, the reason they're so odd, and they sometimes read like non sequiturs, like Mark's
Mm-hmm,
claim that Jesus meant to walk by them. It's like saying,
mm-hmm,
and Jesus had a nice haircut when he was walking on water. It's like a non sequitur. It just it
mm-hmm,
it doesn't fit. Why would you say that? And my argument is, if the scholar decoded it, it was a revelation from the star gods in the
mm-hmm,
form of
mm-hmm,
heavenly writing, and you had to incorporate it. So the other piece you see in Matthew and Mark's gospel is they give you the time. They say they call
mm-hmm.
it the fourth watch of the night. Well, who cares? Jesus is walking on water. Who cares what time he did it? It doesn't matter. But that's
Mm-hmm.
embedded in the eye star of Taurus. You get fourth watch. The words fourth
Got
watch
it.
show up. And the astrologers, that's how they made their living. I mean, they were literally dividing the night into watches, and they used terms, specific terms for that. So if they saw the word for night watch, that's another key. Like the astrologers are looking for night watches. Like that's a word in their. If you're a computer programmer, um, you don't need a saw. Like, a saw is not part of your jargon if you're a
Mm-hmm.
computer programmer, right? Like, you don't say, yeah, let me figure, look, having problems with the computer, let me get this saw and I'll fix it. Like, it's not like that. They use the term in Jesus' Sea Walk when they say fourth watch, they're betraying wisdom. They're, they're like, you know what? We know what watches are. This is when we're working. When we're performing a watch, we're working. And if you weren't an astrologer, you wouldn't really include that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's constantly, you see, again, you get I get just annihilated because I'm playing paleopsychologist, and
Mm-hmm.
it's you get scoffed at in archaeology if you try to play paleopsychologist. But I think it's a valid thing. I think there's enough linguistic evidence to get into the mind of the ancient writer and get inklings and glimmers. And
Mm-hmm.
once you know that Babylonian astrologers viewed the starry sky as celestial writing, and they thought that wordplay, or hidden words, what they call hidden words, is the secret of the gods, then that means every pun becomes a revelation. That's what the book's about.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And you,
yeah,
yeah, you just think maybe this is just the tip of the iceberg. All the passages that seem to make little sense and the whole like disjointed phrases,
yeah,
right? Like it's puzzled me that certain miracles in, for example, there's a dead girl and Jesus whispers in her ear, stand up, and by the way, she was 12. and she comes back alive,
yeah,
right? Like that. I've wondered like why he whispers in her ear to stand up. And by the way, she was 12, right? You wonder if that's ripe with like there's something uh,
right,
astrological to that, because that's a weird thing to say, right?
yeah.
Or
Well, yeah. I mean, it's probably embedded in one of the can you the one of the titles. You mean so off the top of my head? I mean, 12 is just the cuneiform sign Mul. Remember that Mul X I kept showing you?
mhm,
Well, the
mhm,
cuneiform sign Mul X, it's comprised of the number 12. It's like embedded in it. So,
mhm,
so there's your 12. And the girl, like the term for virgin, Parthenos in Greek, uh, Bulutu in Akkadian, is
mhm,
it implies girl because it means you haven't known sex yet. If you haven't known sex, if you're a virgin, you're either unmarried, a girl. Every girl was a virgin. You just couldn't not be a virgin. It would have been unclean to have not been a virgin as a girl. So it's very likely, off the top of my head, I'm thinking, Virgo could very well be that girl. The number 12, and to say or to whisper, I could just look that up and just look at the cuneiform title for you know
yeah,
for for Virgo.
yeah, exactly. And then with the parallels with Orion, you almost think like so he's associated, or let's see, so you know clearly when I'm thinking, there's a god that's looking back, right? I'm
Yeah,
thinking Mithras, right? But he's already associated with Perseus, right?
yeah, embodiment of
Now
Perseus.
you wonder what's going on there. Like he's supposed to be Perseus, but he's kind of acting like Orion there, right? You
Yeah,
wonder.
yeah, he's turned away. The
Yeah,
the
so
thing
I
that
mean,
thoughts the thing that comes to mind, Elliot, is um, so the for whatever reason, there's just a ton of the pyramid text and all that kind of stuff refer to Orion. So they're making a lot of. I mean, he's the supreme deity of the Egyptian world, you know, um, and for whatever reason, it ends up being astronomical reasons that might have. Remember, in the ancient world, it was believed that the stars affected meteorological events. So they made it rain, they made it flood. You know what I'm saying? So, uh, so, that's where Orion gets all his power in Egypt. His connection to the Nile flooding. Sirius and his connection to the Nile flooding. Um, but Mithras, same thing. It's a major. It's a bull slayer constellations. Probably Gilgamesh. The evidence would
yeah,
suggest
yeah,
it's Gilgamesh. Um,
yeah. And
and
you can just keep going. Like Gilgamesh is like Noah, right?
yeah,
But he's also like Mithras. Um, maybe there's the slaying scene where you wonder if there's the slaying of the lamb, right?
mhm,
If what is can Christ be compared to Taurus? I don't like you can just go out like
yeah, yeah. No,
yeah,
what you got to figure out is what are they viewing as their circumscribed tableau. That's the first thing you got to kind of figure out. And um, so obviously, Orion walking on water is the template for Jesus walking on water. And then what I just had to figure, I just said, well, let me just look at the story. Let me just look at all the absurd things that happened, and let me just see if they can be found in the constellations that stand in the backdrop, in the celestial landscape of
mhm,
Jesus Orion walking on the celestial sea. So that's kind of, and it's seminal research. So I'm the only one doing it. So
yeah,
so I'm going to go. I hope to get the next book published with, hopefully through Monkfish. I'm going to do a deep dive into this celestial sea walk, And there's a pagan meaning to that. There's a pagan pictographic um, revelation there, that Christians don't comprehend today, because remember, many of the converts to Christianity were pagan, and
Mhm.
that image of Jesus Orion stepping onto that river constellation. It's the river of death. It's the road you had to travel into the afterlife. So in essence, Jesus Orion walking on water pictographically conveyed what would happen if you converted to Christianity. You would stride upon the rivers of death and live forever, because
Wow.
that's what it means in a pagan mindset. Remember, the
Yeah.
entrance to the underworld is through the portals found at the summer solstice point and the winter solstice point. And when
Yeah.
your soul died, you had to go into that underworld. You had to walk the river of death. And
Mhm.
most people don't make it.
Yeah. And that's just like a pun within a pun, right? And I bet the ancients would just be like astounded at that,
Yeah.
right? Like, well, Christianity is clearly true then, right?
I
That, like,
think almost every image you see that you can envision, Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, the
mhm,
girl, the 12-year-old girl who said, what did
mhm.
he say? I'm trying to remember. I forget that passage.
Uh, I forget. It's either like get up or walk.
Yeah, okay. That
I think he says,
I'm
what does he
willing
say?
to,
Get up and then she walks, if I remember correctly.
yeah, and I'm almost certain that that's the kind of stuff. So basically, this book is a sampler. It introduces you
Yeah.
to the concept, and then each chapter is going to become its own book. So,
Yeah.
Jesus Celestial Sea Walk is already, they've kind of agreed to that verbally. And so, and then, there's the Nativity story. I'll do that one because there's all these books on the Star Bethlehem, and I,
Mhm.
I really appreciate people's hard work, but um, they are, I would call them specious. I would say
Yeah.
that they look true, but you got to know the code, and I I didn't figure out the code. I fell over the code. Like I didn't.
Mhm.
I can't. I wish I could tell I figured it out. I hit it so many times. I'm like, these guys are acting like wordplay is revelation. It's the basis of scripture, and I'm like, and then you find the term, you hidden words are the secret of the gods. I'm like, oh well,
Yeah.
so so I'm not making that up. They said it. I mean, you know, guys in the tradition of Daniel said that. That's not John
Yep.
McHugh saying that. Like
Yeah.
I'm a nobody.
Well,
Like, you know,
yeah. When I think of, like wordplay, puns being the language of the gods, as a dad with my dad jokes and puns, right?
yeah,
I feel like a prophet, right? But
yeah, exactly.
yeah,
And
you wonder.
kids,
Yeah.
yeah, you take a little kid who's learning to count for
Yes.
kindergarten.
Yeah.
You hold the number six up and you turn around and they're like, "Oh my God, it's a nine!" And you're like, "What did you do?" And you're like,
Yeah.
"I'll
Yeah.
let you know when you get older, son." you know,
That's
so
too funny.
but
Yep.
yeah, but Elliot, I just want to I want to just emphasize that today we have a hard time comprehending that because you think of Jay Leno's he's not in vogue anymore, but he was the funniest guy around for a while. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And he used puns all the time. You know what I'm saying? And he we think of it as witticism and humor. Bill Maher uses it, but
Mhm.
but but imagine, you know, if you were in Europe and you were trying to decide on who would be a good prime minister, or the midterm election comes up, and imagine people saying, "Well, I'm looking for people whose wordplay in their title, their name says." He will be a good leader. She will be a great leader. Something to that effect. Like
Yeah.
that would be insane. We just wouldn't do it that way.
Yeah.
But remember, in the ancient world, words, names embodied essence. That's why God says you're going to have to name all these animals we just made. Because if you can name them, you've got power over them. And that's part of magic, right? If I know something, if I know a secret name, then I have some control over you. I have taken a little piece of your magic. So that's
Yeah.
why whenever you find a pun in the ancient world, it says, secret of the scholar. The uninitiated cannot see this,
Hmm.
because if they did, it would be spiritually dangerous. You would be
Yeah.
giving away power. Um,
Yeah. And Christ is making them all the time. Like, Bart Ehrman talks about one that, what is it? Play on the words with Lord of the Sabbath,
mhm,
right? I forget how it goes down in the Greek, but it's a pun, right?
mhm,
Or you have to be born from above or born again, right?
yeah,
So in Greek, it means born from above can also be interpreted being born again, and then he clearly means born from above. But he says, well, but me, a full-grown man, how can I be born again, right? Like, how can I literally be born again, right? Not even in a that the disciples don't get it, right? They're
yeah,
not initiated. They just don't
yes,
get the clear pun. And I mean, from kind of this perspective, the reader would interpret that to say this guy is divine, right? He's making
yeah,
all these quick puns and the double meanings. So yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense, and I think it'll make a lot of sense out of stuff that doesn't make sense, right? Just like weird, disjointed stuff, right? Out
yep,
of the that ties apologists in knots, right? Like
yes,
what is even going on here, right? Or like,
yeah.
yeah,
Like Jesus walking by the boat in Mark's version of the sea walk, and the boat instantly teleporting 3.5 miles to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Like, how could you not write that down? Like, if that happened,
mm-hmm,
you're present, or even if it was passed on word of mouth, how could you not write that down? But the words instantaneously appeared on the shore is embedded as wordplay in that
yeah,
celestial sea walk.
yeah,
And I go into the book. I go into it far more in depth than I did in the presentation here. Um, and I do it also in the scholarly article, and I think it's Astronomy and Ancient Technologies. Um,
mm-hmm,
but yeah, so that's kind of uh, that's what the book's about. And um, I just, you know, I just I hope so your viewers will,
mm-hmm,
I urge you to please purchase the book, and certainly send feedback. Um,
absolutely,
I I had to I have to, as you can see, the pictures are essential, and I have to explain how punning emerges in cuneiform writing. Like,
mm-hmm,
it's so pervasive that we just don't know how to understand it in English.
yeah.
And um,
No,
so
absolutely. Would we, before we go, maybe we'll answer some questions, if
sure,
that's all right? All
yeah,
right, brilliant. All right. So, and this is a question that I kind of
yeah.
thought when we were talking. Behemoth and Leviathan, right? I know that this is common in Islam, where they're talking about there seems to be some early Islamic mythology with Nun, right? Which is Leviathan,
Mhm.
a ginormous whale, right?
Mhm.
What do you think about a very early, like an alternate creation myth involving a giant whale or fish?
Off the cuff, it looks like I'm looking at her name's Lauren. So to Lauren,
Hmm.
it sounds like off the cuff. I'm thinking Ketis. I'm thinking the sea serpent, the sea dragon. Um,
Hmm.
that's that comes to mind. The other one, you got to remember, like the title for Hydra in cuneiform is literally sea serpent. I mean, Musha Abba. It means snake of the sea or sea snake, and
Mhm.
uh, that's exactly where this is coming from. They're not talking about the difference for Lauren is just to explain is they're looking at pictures in the stars, they're decoding wordplay to get the action, and they're then writing that down as historic history, actual history that occurred on Earth. They're not saying, hey, I'm looking at a picture story in the stars. They're saying, oh, if I see it in the stars, then it happened on Earth. You see it in the Our Father prayer on Earth as it is in
Mhm.
heaven. It's the bringing down the heavens to Earth. And that's, in essence, what this is.
Yeah.
I hope that helps, Lauren.
Yep, absolutely. And here's another question. Michele Gosala. I'm not familiar, but that was an Indian ascetic. I haven't. I don't know if that name rings a bell with you.
I got it. I'm embarrassed to tell you that my expertise is not in Indian religious mythology,
Yep.
Vedic mythology. Uh,
Although I wonder if
oh, there is
maybe
a
it
cowshed.
actually is. What's that?
There's a cow. There's a cow's
Yeah.
head. Yeah, there's an uru. You could make the argument that uh, that there's a that somehow um, you could make the argument that the manger constellation in Cancer was more of a barn, like a shed, a cow shed, a barn,
Yeah.
because two of the stars next to the manger are donkeys. So I'm thinking it's Delta and Gamma Cancri are donkey constellations positions. They're straddling the manger. They're eating from the manger, which is a feeding
Hmm.
trough. So
Yeah.
I'm willing to bet it's connected to that. There's definite, unequivocal Mesopotamian religious astronomy astrology that has made it into the Indian world.
Yeah. See, that's this is a. I was thinking along the same lines. What about Dharmic thought, right? Hinduism, right?
Yeah,
I mean, I can't possibly. We were talking about in Sumerian Gan, right?
yeah,
Especially, I mean, the same anglicization GAN rather than GON.
yeah,
That
yeah,
that's if you know Ganesh, right? He's sometimes referred to as Gan or Ganapati, right? I mean, I
mhm,
couldn't imagine there's any kind of etymologic relationship, but it makes you wonder, like, what is going on with Hinduism, especially like a prince with the head of an elephant, right? He's
yeah,
killed by Shiva in a bathtub. I mean, that just looks like no, he's born from the bathtub, and his head is cut and replaced by an elephant. You wonder, like, it's on the same lines that story doesn't make straightforward sense, right? Like a youthful prince who born from a bathtub isn't going to get his head chopped off by Shiva, right, and replaced by
right.
a. So you wonder, like, I you wonder, well, if that's where it comes from, but I mean, I couldn't imagine you'd have comment on that because it's so far afield.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah,
Again, I it takes so long to do this stuff that
yeah,
um, I don't, I don't have a whole lot of time for other stuff. I mean, it's fascinating what you
yeah.
just said, and what. Please, if I butcher your name, please forgive me. Macaulay just said. Macaulay just said it's fascinating, and I think there's unequivocal connection there. But I got so much on my plate, I just don't ever get a chance to go down these intriguing avenues. You know what I mean? But maybe you can. Maybe your viewers can.
Yeah, it'd be yeah, I mean, it just opens up a whole new realm
Yeah,
to everything, doesn't it? That
yeah, it does.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
certainly. All right. Well, I see we've gone on past 2 hours.
Yeah.
I'd imagine you have other things to do.
It's been a pleasure, though. It's been a
Yep.
pleasure. Yeah, it's been a
Yep.
pleasure. I've enjoyed presenting and enjoyed your patience. I hope your viewers enjoy it, and you know the presentation. And I thank you so much, Elliot, for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredible. Like I'm gonna have to go through this, and yeah, I mean, I don't want to take your time, but yeah, it's astounding. It honestly is astounding.
Well, thank
So
you.
yeah,
Thank
thank you
you.
so much for coming on. We'll have to do it again sometime. And
Sounds wonderful.
yeah, thank you again. And everybody buy the book.
All right.
And link's going to be in the description here.
All right.
Yep,
Wonderful.
absolutely.
Wonderful. Thanks
Yep.
so much. Take care.
Yep. Bye-bye. Yep.
Bye, Brave New World.